Good evening, everyone. Today, before we step into marginalization, it's important to know what we are talking about. We will be hearing the word marginalization quite a bit in the following sessions, but it's important to understand where we are going and where we come from. So let's first explore what marginalization is. You will hear quite a few definitions for marginalization this evening, but I have an interesting prospect to ask you. Are we, in a way, marginalizing marginalization itself by binding it to a single definition? Marginalization can be generalized into one phrase, and one phrase alone, and that is being excluded from societal participation. Marginalization at its core is an exclusion of a person from societal participation. So societal mobility is reduced to a minimum or to none at all. This is marginalization in its modern definition. What does it mean to be truly marginalized? It's truly a question that's to be asked every day, because a lot of people say they're marginalized, and then when you check on them, they're not truly marginalized. So what does it truly mean to be marginalized? I would like to restrict it to a definition for the sake of this paper presentation. It is the initial societal, and then it goes to the physical, and then the final administrative and legislative shackling of a community on its ability to survive on its own. Marginalization truly does start at a societal level. It is the shunning of a person. When that person is shunned societally, their ability to do things physically also gets reduced to a great capacity. And I will get into what I mean by administrative and legislative shackling. But I believe the final stage of this is the legislative shackling of a community. This is how a community finally gets marginalized. But on a basic aspect, we usually say that throughout history, societies have been marginalized on the basis of color, religion, ethnicity, gender, sex, socioeconomic status, etc. And now that is the thing. When you talk about marginalization, depending on what aspect you're talking about, it changes. Did marginalization prove as an effective tool for survival? Many people usually ask, why do we marginalize each other? Why do we put each other in brackets? Why do we put each other in boxes? There are theories that marginalization was an effective survival tool, but I do not think in today's society that this is an acceptable excuse, that a tool for survival in a world where resources are plentiful. Like I said, discrimination could be perhaps justified as a tool for survival in prehistoric times, but in a developed society where there are resources enough for everyone, it becomes inexcusable. I'll give you a simple etymology of marginalization. For those who don't know, etymology means the origins of the word. Much like many other words, marginalization is actually a word which has taken a backseat. The original meaning has taken a backseat, and it's now a word which is used to mean something else. So what used to mean to write notes in the margin of, so we all have notebooks in our hand and there are margins, so you usually used to write notes in the margins, right? That has now become to relegate to an unimportant power or position. Just to give you a citation, this is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary itself. In this paper which I present, I will also be using these words interchangeably, like discriminate, segregate, and exclude. Now, let us look into the procedure of how to ostracize an individual. We all know communities get marginalized, but how do they truly get ostracized from community? Let's talk about Indian society. We have the caste system, monolith, true monolith of Indian culture. And it is still prevalent in our society. Not too long ago, I believe in January, there was an honor killing of a 10-year-old boy in the name of the caste system. So this is a system which is still prevalent to this day. The laws of the ancient times were based on the Dharma Shastras, or the documents which provided the legal conduct of the land. And the Dharma Shastras on its own divided society into 4 sects. 4 on paper, that is to be exact. There is a 5th level which no one talks about, and those are called Dalits. We know of them today because of the works of many great people. But on paper there were only 4 levels. The 5th ones are Dalits. What should have been a mere segregation on the basis of employment turned into a weapon to control the masses due to subjective importance of what was handed to each profession. In our Indian society, we ended up giving the most importance to education. So, by way of this, the people who educate and were educated were given the highest position. And those who did the lowly jobs, the so called lowly jobs of sweeping, cleaning the sewage, all of this was considered clean or, dirty. So, what was generally just a profession segregation turned into a power segregation. By what standards can we measure marginalization in a society then? We say a lot of people are marginalized in a society. It can be on the basis of race. In the US, it could be the black people. Here, it could be Dalits. It depends on from place to place. It depends on the context as well. But I do not believe that you can truly define marginalization on its own. I will try to, but I truly believe I cannot. It is a subjective standard that is imposed on our objective assessment, which affects our final outlook on society. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but I'll explain what I mean. A subjective assessment of our, a subjective standard on our objective assessment. I may look at you, or I may look at you, and I'll think, okay, that's a lady, that's a woman. Now, my subjective standard might be that, say I'm a misogynist. I look at a woman and I'm like, oh, that's a lady. That is my subjective standard affecting my objective assessment. This is what marginalization does. If everyone is truly objective, then I do not believe marginalization would exist. But it is subjective standards, which is imposed on this, which affects our final outlook on society. And for the sake of this paper, when I talk about things that construe our outlook on society, I'll be calling them determinants. To mix bias with law. So this is something we are notorious for. Indians as a whole, because our laws predominantly come from customs. Customs are deeply enrooted in our land, and customs also have a lot of bias in them. So, let us straight away move into the colonial era. A lot of the laws that were developed were actually inherently based in the caste system of India, whether the British realized it or not. The British had true control over us, but what they did not know is they were participating in our own caste system and they were making laws. A very profound example of this is the Criminal Tribes Act 1871. It outlawed many of the original settlers of the countries. What were the original settlers of the countries? We call them Adivasis. Many of us would consider that a very derogatory term, but that is what the Adivasis, the first people, the First Nation people. They were the original settlers, and what we ended up doing is due to the caste system, they ended up being Dalits. A totally arbitrary system made the original settlers of the land the untouchables, which is ludicrous. But either way, what happened is these people who were societally constricted ended up getting physically constricted to a certain area of land. And what happened is these very same people had to move into a life of dacoity and robbery. So what ended up happening is these Adivasis turned to a life of crime. So whenever stagecoaches would move through the area, they would rob it. There's a very notorious Naxalite called Veerappan in Tamil Nadu. Many of you might know of his story. And similarly, then the British said enough is enough, we're going to make this illegal, and they brought down the Criminal Tribes Act 1871. Although many of the tribe members were involved in the stagecoach robberies, we must first understand what restricted them to a crime of life first. Like I said, we find that in the caste system in India, those living in the forests, they were considered to be the lowest of low people. And this restricted their social capabilities. It restricts your social mobility to climb the social ladder. If you're not allowed to participate in society, how are you expected to get up? So, as the rest of the community, they were best forced to survive at the mercy of the forest. It is okay to keep a man in a forest without any restrictions, but if you keep a man in the forest and you tell him you can't go anywhere else, you become breathless. You can't breathe. So once land encroach, so you constrict them to their own land, which is okay. But you also start to take their land and their natural resources. And they got cut off from that as well. So what do? They turn to a life of crime. This led to them being outlawed. So you remember initially I said I'll give a definition for marginalization. So when I first said it is a societal restriction, as you can see, they were first made into Adivasis. They were termed Adivasis and they were not allowed to participate in society. That is the societal restriction. The next was the physical. They were made to stay in one part of land because society said you are unclean, don't come next to us. You will not be allowed to participate in society anyway, so stay where you are. So it became a physical restriction. From societal it turned to physical. So what happened when it turned physical? You remove a man's ability to walk, he will turn angry. Yes? If I take off your legs one day, will you smile at me? No, of course not. You'll get angry. So when they turn to a life of crime, what the British said is they're obviously criminals. Let's bring a law for this. What we do not understand is who is to blame, the British? No, it is the caste system. Crime is crime, yes, but it's the caste system which has brought them down to this point. So that is what I initially mean by the administrative or legislative shackling of a community. All right. Yeah. I have a lot more to present, and you can find it in my paper. But I would finally conclude with this small diagram that I made. Marginalization is a vicious cycle. It will not end today, it will not end tomorrow, but maybe soon in the future. So a quick way to tell you how marginalization works is, marginalization happens by the way of determinants. As I told you earlier, things that construe society or outlook, like religion, race, whatever it is. That leads to strenuous circumstances for communities.
Solution attempt on your part.
On our part, I cannot. If I'm talking about India, sir, I cannot give you a unified code. Substantive, what do you say? Formal equality will not work for us. A unified code will not work for us, depending because our nation is so very culturally diverse.
And unequal ab initio, one can say. From the very beginning of society is unequal.
Yes.
It cannot be easily addressed.
It cannot be easily addressed, but it can be addressed. That is where we are failing. If I was to give a solution for this, it would be talk to one another. That is where it all starts.
Talking everyone is so beautiful.
Yes.
About equality, people will give big lectures.
Sir, but
when it comes to reality, we are very tough.
Yeah.
Being an young social scientist, you will be having some novel plan for a
I would not present any new ideas unless I believe it's. I know, sir. I believe this starts at the root, which is education, at the very basic. So, just to conclude, strenuous circumstances, it leads to the marginalization by way of legislature. And then what happens when people are deemed criminals? You start to look at them more negative. And what does that do? It just enforces the same old standards. That is how marginalization works in a nutshell.
Okay.
Thank you.